Welcome to Krome Cast. Check it out. I'm Sam Major, Commercial Director for Krome Technologies, and I'm joined today by Paul Edwards, Senior Technical Consultant. We're here to talk about how to effectively secure your wireless network and some of the best practices that we'd recommend when looking at either new deployments or I guess, refitting or renovating someone's legacy corporate Wi-Fi.
Yes. Hi, Sam. Thanks for having me.
So I've seen, today's, I guess, evolving working environment kind of, not say post-pandemic, it still rolls on to a certain extent, but the way we've worked has fundamentally changed. It's not going to go back to how it was before, and we are now very much reliant on wireless networking for the way we work, be it in an office, from home, could be in a coffee shop somewhere, and I love a bit of free Wi-Fi, but some of the things you've told me kind of off camera make me think about how I'm using that and some of my behaviours, how I should be using it moving forward. So it'd be great if you could tell our audience today, we've obviously helped people many years now working on Wi-Fi installations, and we've picked up some good knowledge. So it's a good knowledge base, I like to think. So it'd be good to get from you kind of the key concerns or considerations that you give when looking at a wireless network deployment. And we can do this from two angles. It could be, the clean slate, how we do it from brand new, but most instances we see are kind of an evolution of someone's Wi-Fi network. So things we look for then and improvements that could be made, considerations people can think of. So as the more learned person in the room, I'll kind of chuck it to you, and feel free just to rattle through some of the considerations you'd have.
Okay, so traditionally many businesses have used credential-based Wi-Fi authentication, very similar to exactly the same as a home network. You put in a password, you connect to a network. It's very simple, and it works in a home environment, but it's not really suitable for a business environment where you need to secure data.
Is that where I've been in this business before? And to be honest, we used to be one of them, where you'd see kind of the guest Wi-Fi password even by the coffee machine or on a pin board or something, right?
Exactly that.
So,
using that for your production environment is not really ideal.
Yeah.
A far more secure way of setting up wireless access is using certificate-based authentication. A lot of businesses will already have a Windows Server estate, and it's very straightforward then to deploy a certificate authority, a Windows certificate authority that integrates with Active Directory to issue certificates to end users and end user devices to use for authentication, and a whole host of other things as well. But we're going to talk about Wi-Fi authentication today.
Okay, so that sounds quite interesting, but how does, and again, this is obviously for a technical audience, that sounds great, but how does someone actually go about implementing that and, I guess, securing it, etc., etc.?
So once an enterprise certificate authority has been deployed, it's a Windows Server role and configured. It will require what's known as a network policy server or NPS server. This will act as a radius server, allowing radius clients such as access points to connect and to authenticate users and devices against your Active Directory domain, against their using their certificate.
Okay, quick question on that one then. You were talking about different devices and whatnot. That's not just used for Wi-Fi technology, that's certificate technology, or am I misunderstanding that?
You can use it for Wi-Fi authentication. You can also use it for wired authentication. It's 802.1x. Essentially, so you can use it for wired authentication. You can use it for VPNs, signing documents. You can use it once it's deployed. You can use it for a whole host of things.
Okay, so that would stop the Luddite like me popping into someone's office and grabbing an RJ45 connection and trying to get a connection to something.
Exactly that. Cool.
Okay, so this is, and again, I'm not a Wi-Fi, I won't say expert. I'm not that knowledgeable on Wi-Fi. I know what it does. Data in the air moving around, brilliant. But the security side of it, again, we talked off camera, and some of the mistakes I've made in the past, you think, okay, I should pay more attention to this stuff, especially given what I do. But we talked about PKI certificates and so on.
Yep.
So again, I've heard of it, but I didn't know what it stood for. And it'd be great, again, if you could just give us a bit more insight and information on that.
So PKI or public key infrastructure is a way of managing, controlling, revoking when they're no longer required certificates on a network, we're talking about Windows, on an Active Directory domain as well. So if you've got a device that's lost, stolen, you need to prevent that from connecting to your network, revoke the certificate. You don't need to change any passwords. You don't have to get all the other users to update their Wi-Fi password. It stops connecting. So
we talked about kind of secure passwords before, and a lot of this same kind of information, it's human behaviours and whatnot. You remove, not having to make people update passwords or reissue passwords, etc. We stop the post-it note on the bottom of the screen for a start. But I guess from a management perspective, especially if you've got a larger enterprise with JML process and all that sort of stuff, a person needs, you haven't got to take a whole OU and go, everyone's got a new password to do. It's granular in its approach.
Yes, absolutely. And also from a burden on the help desk perspective, there's no passwords, Wi-Fi passwords to give out to users. There's no passwords to change. The devices just connect. They also, because the users don't know the password, don't have the password, they can't share it either with other users in the business or with their family if they live close by, or other devices. They may own personal devices, for example. They can't use that to get onto the production internal network for any non-corporate device.
Okay, so that's an interesting point about own devices and so on. We saw that, especially beginning of the pandemic, where everyone kind of grabbed any device they could to try and work. We certainly saw customers having to deal with this proliferation of home devices, and that, and we discussed this, brings its own concerns around security and whatnot. And be interested in your thoughts, your approach, how we protect our environment, customer environments, etc., from people using, let's call it non-networked approved, or what the correct terminology is, devices, and I guess how we configure our and our clients' wireless networks to protect against not an erroneous device, because someone's not doing it on purpose, someone's using what they can, but how we kind of give access to what they can have and then protect the crown jewels, what they shouldn't be accessing.
Yeah, you really need to keep those users, visitors as well, off the internal production network. Keep them isolated onto a guest network or a staff network that doesn't have access to.
So when I look at my Wi-Fi, find a Wi-Fi network, and I do because I just connected to the prod. But if you look through it, we've got a guest and a staff and a prod and so on. So what's the difference in what I can and can't do on those? Let's say I'm a visitor to the business. What I can and can't do, and what we've done to actually set up each one of those so that it is, I guess, segregated or protected.
So we have our production network that's used for Krome laptops, Krome devices. So they need to have a certificate on them to connect to that Wi-Fi. Your issue with the laptop, it just connects. There's no passwords involved. So that's secured, and that provides access to our, I guess, the most critical resources, file servers, things like that. It still goes through a firewall, there's still scanning on that traffic, but it allows access to the core of the network, really.
I'll tell you how smooth that is as well. When we implemented that, I didn't even realise we started talking these conversations, I didn't actually have to put password anymore to connect to a wireless network. It just happens. So I guess if you haven't done that as a business, you should, because it's actually brilliant from a user perspective. Yeah. Okay, so that's our prod, and then we've got staff and we've got guest, have we not? We've
got staff and we've got guest. So for staff, it's isolated from our production network. You can only get to the internet. It still goes through a firewall, still scanned, still got some controls on URL filtering, but it's very much internet only. There is no other access to internal resources, internal servers. We've got a visitors or a guest network, which is that does use password-based authentication with visitors. You can't really have control over their devices to put a certificate on there. You have to use a password, but that password will be rotated periodically, and it's again only allows access to the internet. There's no other access there. It's all
is that straight out? Or is that via a firewall still?
All goes through a firewall. It's got slightly different traffic control measures. There's some things we can't do with guest traffic where we don't have control of their devices, but it's still scanned. It still offers very similar protection, but it's just there's no access to our internal resources there. Okay.
So then, and obviously I talked before about how I've been guilty of just jumping on someone's free Wi-Fi before because it's there. Now, do I assume that goes through some sort of firewall and I'm offered? And we offer that to our guests, right? Surely everyone does. Or that I'm in the Wild Wild West and I'm at risk and should know better.
A lot of websites will use SSL, HTTPS. You'll see it in the address bar to encrypt the data between your laptop and the website you're visiting. So as long as you've got a padlock and some address bars are...
Always pay attention to that.
The browsers are pretty good. They'll flag sites now as not secure. So that does encrypt traffic. However, you really need to be using a VPN to secure that traffic. If you use a full tunnel VPN, all your internet traffic will go back to your corporate firewall. You can protect it with the same URL filtering policies, the same scanning ability. If you've got a layer 7 firewall, you'll be able to protect that traffic and your device a lot better, so that when they come back to the office, you know there's nothing on there that shouldn't be.
Which is why we have a mandatory VPN connection. So if I do happen to be in a coffee shop down the road hijacking their free Wi-Fi, I'm protected from doing us any damage.
Absolutely. All the traffic is encrypted.
Brilliant. It's good to know. Okay, so there's some good points on kind of what we've done around segregation, the VLANs, etc., working the Wild Wild West, and then how we protect that. I guess some of the other scenarios that we see when talking to our customers will be, and we have seen a fair bit of this, to be honest with you, that kind of lovely greenfield, come and help me with my Wi-Fi, and then the evolution, I've got lovely, very heavy bricked building and my Wi-Fi's not working very well. Kind of key considerations, I guess, when looking at both. We'll start with greenfield. What do we do? How do we do that? How do we make sure a Wi-Fi implementation is successful? And I guess the more tricky one is always the kind of listed buildings and whatnot with thick walls that we have to sometimes deal with. But should we start with greenfield?
Yeah, so there is a Wi-Fi planning tool that we can use to gauge where to place access points. Physically, they should be kind of out of reach of users from a security point of view as well. Less chance of them unplugging things, plugging in their own devices. So the more you can hide them within reason, the better. Yeah. Placing them and the type of access point. Some are higher density ones, now support a load of users concurrently. So it's really sizing the correct access point, but also the location of the access point and the number as well.
That's quite an interesting point, actually, the physical location, because I do know people that have tried to jam cables into Wi-Fi's and whatnot. We do see it, but that's obviously if you leave them out. Now, you can't see them around the office because you've done the clever thing and buried them in the ceiling and whatnot, which is quite common. But that makes you think about I've never really thought about it, Paul, but there's obviously a method to the madness around where we put these things in office. But how do you work out? I guess you mentioned different APs before as well, so these have different flavours, different strengths and whatnot. So how do you work out what is the most suitable AP for our use, for our clients' use? I guess what are the different variables, and how do you make sure we have them in the right place?
It comes down really to the models offered by that vendor and picking one that's appropriate to their use case. We've gone into offices and seen access points kind of hidden away in a corner, which is really not the ideal place to have it in a corner on the floor. A user can easily unplug it, and from a signal strength point of view, it's not great either. Somewhere central in the ceiling is ideal. Users can't get to them, well, at least not easily. And
pretty determined.
Yeah, absolutely. So you don't have them, unplugging them, restarting them at will. Yeah. So from a security point, it's great. From a signal strength, it's even better because it's central and it's somewhere that can reach the most area with that single AP. Where you've got to deploy multiple APs, positioning and signal strength does come into it.
That was interesting. You talk about signal strength. Again, turning me off camera, trying to educate me slightly. But I always thought it's just best to have as many APs as you can, all blasting out a signal, and that's got, obviously saturation has got to be the best way of doing it, but I'm clearly wrong.
Not always, no. You can have too much, and they can get to a point where they start to interfere with each other, and they start to kind of negatively interact, and actually you end up in a worse state by having more APs. So switching them off, dialing down the signal strength can actually give you a better overall coverage, because each AP will better cover its own area.
I've seen that in some of the wireless mapping assessments where we kind of plot out how it is and then how it could be. It's quite interesting. I've always, as I said, I thought just seeing it splurge with Wi-Fi signal would be the best, but actually how you guys work that all out is actually really interesting, especially when you see some of the older buildings we've worked with where people think they've got it right and they actually walk around the wand and see it's not so good, and how you guys actually map it to work is actually very interesting. So, and there's been some very interesting points on this whole topic, but it would be good, before we wrap up, if you could, for our audience, I guess, top things that you consider when looking at any wireless deployment, when you talk to a customer, you think these are the things we must discuss today.
Deploy multiple wireless networks, SSIDs, one for your production network, one for your staff to use for personal devices. It's going to happen in any network, and one for your visitors as well. So segregate traffic from all of those, place them all on different VLANs, and deploy a PKI for your internal infrastructure. It's a great way to secure your corporate devices, to make sure that they are the only ones that are authorised or allowed on your production network.
Cool. And then enforce the VPN connection for when your commercial director's working in the coffee shop.
Yeah, coffee shop or even a home network where you don't have control over it, you don't have the same corporate policies. It's really essentially all the same, it's untrusted. So yeah, deploy a VPN and secure the traffic.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on this edition of Krome Cast. Check it out. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment and share. If there's anything you'd like us to cover in future episodes, leave it in the comment section below. Thank you.